right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into a story that's been making headlines surrounding Mayor Adams here in New York and this attempted dismissal of his corruption case. So let's just jump right in, figure out what happened, what it means, and what it all means for the city going forward.
Yeah, this whole thing really kind of highlights how messy things can get when you're talking about law and politics, especially in a place like New York.
So to set the stage, let's start with the charges against Mayor Adams.
Okay.
We're talking about 5 federal charges, and they're all related to these allegations that he's been accepting bribes, mishandling campaign contributions, that kind of thing. Important to remember, though, that Adams has pleaded not guilty to all charges.
And, that sets us up for what could be a really long legal battle. But things took a pretty wild turn before the case could even really get going.
That is an understatement.
She says, I attended a meeting on January 31st with Mr. Bove, Adams' counsel, and members of my team. Adams' attorneys repeatedly urged what amounted to a quid pro quo, indicating that Adams would be in a position to assist with the department's enforcement priorities only if this indictment were dismissed. What Adams and his attorneys were offering was that he would help with the enforcement of immigration activities in New York City, the sanctuary status, all the things that Donald Trump wants, if they drop this case. And, that's one of the things she makes in this accusation. Now, Bove, for his part, responds today saying, essentially, we're accepting your resignation. And he also puts on administrative leave the attorneys who are running this case in the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office. And I'll read you just a part of what he says. He says that they had determined that there was weaponization in bringing this case, Jake. And he says the Justice Department will not tolerate the insubordination and apparent misconduct reflected in the approach that you and your office have taken in this matter. So what we know now, Jake, is this. After he had asked for the office to dismiss this case, and she had declined, saying nobody in her office was willing to sign the documents to dismiss the case, what happens next is that Bove goes to the public integrity section here in Washington, and he asks them, go to New York and sign these dismissals. They also declined, and they resigned. So as a result, Kevin Driscoll, who is the top career lawyer in the criminal division overseeing the public integrity section, he resigned today. And John Keller, also the acting head of the public integrity section, Jake, he resigned as a result of all of this.
Right.
So the Justice Department, under Emil Bove, the acting deputy attorney general, a former lawyer for Donald Trump, actually ordered the dismissal of the whole case. Their argument was that this would allow Adams to focus on things like combating illegal immigration, his re-election campaign, basically that this was in the best interest of the city.
It's certainly interesting, right? Because dismissing a corruption case so that the mayor can focus on other priorities, that's not typical.
Tied under the last administration, you've agreed to sign an executive order to open up an ICE office at Rikers Island so that these dangerous criminals that are here illegally can be deported. Tell the folks at home, because they'll hear this, they'll say, oh, they're going to come after me next. You said these are the worst of the worst. So who is at Rikers Island that will be deported? What have they done?
And you bring in 2 points where the far left has hijacked this narrative. ICE is running in our schools, ICE is running in our churches, and they are creating this frenzy. They're not in the business of just grabbing children. And we need to, just stop all this noise. Rikers Island, particularly after all the reforms, Rikers Island is now having some of the most dangerous people in our city. And by having ICE on Rikers Island, part of our gang intelligence, using our intel with NYPD correction officers, we can identify those gangs inside and outside on the street. There was no reason they were removed from Rikers Island. And as I sat down with Tom earlier, I said that we're going to look at all the legalese. I'm able to do an executive order to put them back on Rikers Island, what they should be with part of our criminal justice apparatus.
When I was reading through all these articles you sent in, what really struck me is how quickly this went from what seemed like an open and shut corruption case to a full-on political crisis. What do you think about that?
And I think it really shows the power of public scrutiny. People are watching, and there's already this deep mistrust when it comes to anything that looks like political games within the justice system. So when this happened, people noticed.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't just like a one-time thing. everything kind of blow up after that.
Okay, so let's talk about that chain reactions. First, you've got Danielle Sassoon. She's the interim U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. She flat out refused to comply with the order to drop the charges.
She said no.
Yeah.
Which is huge, right? Danielle Sassoon, she's a respected conservative jurist, appointed by Trump. She had worked on the Sam Bankman-Fried case, so her saying no, it really meant something.
Yeah, exactly. You had coming in left and right.
Yeah.
You had 6 other prosecutors, and these are from the Public Integrity Unit, which, just so everyone remembers, this is the unit responsible for investigating corruption cases. And they all resigned. They all said, we're not going to be a part of this.
Yeah, it was a pretty powerful statement. And the Public Integrity Unit, they have this reputation for being independent.
Yeah.
So all these experienced prosecutors resigning, that's a big deal. It really hurts the Justice Department's credibility.
And, it's not like they were quiet about it either.
No, they didn't. You also had Hagan Scotten. He was another prosecutor assigned to the Adams case, and he resigned too.
He straight up accused the Justice Department of looking for, and I'm quoting here, a fool to dismiss these charges.
It's pretty telling, right? Gives you a sense of what the atmosphere was like, morally and ethically. The mess, this wasn't about people trying to get out of work. These were serious people risking their careers because they felt like something was deeply wrong.
And then we get Danielle Sassoon's resignation letter. She claims that Adams' lawyers proposed this quid pro quo. They said, if you drop the charges, we'll help you out with the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration.
That's serious. That's abuse of power. And it could implicate Adams and the people in the Justice Department who were trying to get the case dismissed.
It's hard to prove these kinds of things, right? Like a quid pro quo.
Proving quid pro quo is really, really hard. They don't leave a paper trail.
So it's one person's word against another.
You've got all these prosecutors resigning in protest. You've got Sassoon with her reputation, and she's putting her neck on the line with this allegation.
It definitely adds weight to what she's saying. You see Adams, he's hanging out with Trump's border czar, Thomas Homan, making comments on Fox News about how they're going to work together on immigration. This is all happening while the Justice Department is trying to drop his case.
It's suspicious, and it feeds right into this narrative that something shady is going on. Like, forget the quid pro quo for a second. Just on the surface, this doesn't exactly line up with what Adams is saying about how he's just focused on governing the city, putting New York first.
Yeah, and speaking of New York and putting New York first, you can't ignore all the political fallout from this. You've got big names like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Nydia Velázquez. They're worried that Trump might have some kind of leverage over him now and that it'll affect the city's policies.
Yeah, it shows that trust has been broken. And now Adams is walking a tightrope politically. Public scrutiny is coming from all sides.
Oh, yeah. And we can't forget about Governor Hochul.
Oh, right.
Even Thomas Homan, Trump's border czar, he's called for her resignation, too.
It's a microcosm, like all these big questions we have as a country about justice, about power, about how our system works. It's all playing out right here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to unpack, right? We've uncovered this whole web of events, more questions than answers. When we come back, we'll dive into the potential consequences for Adams, the Justice Department, and what it all means for the political scene here in New York City. Where do we even go from here? What are we looking at legally? Especially with that quid pro quo thing, it's a pretty big deal. What could happen to Adams if that turns out to be true?
If they can prove that quid pro quo, it's going to be bad. I mean, you're talking about serious consequences because what it suggests is that he was willing to use his power as mayor to influence a federal case for his own benefit. And that's abuse of power, plain and simple.
Yeah. And from what I read in these articles you sent me, proving something like that is really, really tough, right? Like, how do you even prove a quid pro quo?
It's one of the hardest things to prove legally. By its very nature, it's a secret agreement. Backroom deals. They don't exactly leave a paper trail. So a lot of times it comes down to he said, she said. Hard to make that connection to show that there was a clear exchange of favors.
So what makes this specific allegation, what could make this case stronger?
Well, a couple things. You've got all these prosecutors, right? Experienced prosecutors. They're from the Public Integrity Unit. They're the ones who investigate these kinds of cases. And they all quit rather than dismiss the charges against Adams. That says something, right? They clearly saw something that was way off, more than just a political difference of opinion.
It makes me wonder what they knew.
Exactly. She's a conservative jurist, and she was willing to risk her career to bring this forward. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's not something you just brush off. And the timing of everything, too, right? Like we said before, Adams is suddenly best buds with Trump, making statements, going on Fox News, all this stuff about how they're going to work together on immigration.
Yeah, it looks bad. Even if you forget about the quid pro quo for a second, it doesn't look good. It doesn't match up with what Adams is saying about focusing on the city and all that.
Do you think this is going to have a lasting impact on their reputation? Like how people see them?
Oh, absolutely. This whole thing has exposed some weaknesses, some vulnerabilities within the Justice Department. And it raises these questions about how much are they influenced by politics? And the fact that the order to dismiss came from Emil Bove, who, like you said, used to work for Trump, it just makes things even more complicated.
Even if it was just the appearance of it, that can be enough to damage people's trust in the justice system, right?
Exactly. And right now, the way the Justice Department handled this, it created this narrative that some people get special treatment, that not everyone's equal under the law. And remaining that trust, that's going to take time.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. How do you think all of this is going to affect the 2025 election? Can Adams realistically run again after all this?
The allegations, the prosecutors quitting, the whole Justice Department thing, it's all hurt his image, and it's eroded people's trust in him. He's got people from his own party calling for him to resign. His approval ratings are down.
It's definitely caused a lot of division, that's for sure. And it seems like it's more than just the usual Democrat versus Republican thing, right? It's about trust. It's about ethics. It's about the soul of the city. What kind of leadership do we want?
Yeah, it's become this focal point we're worried about our institutions, about how much power these individuals have, about the future of democracy itself.
It's almost like we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, Like what's going to happen next? Are more people going to resign? Will they find any actual proof of a quid pro quo?
It's hard to predict what's going to happen, but one thing's for sure. This story isn't over. It's going to keep unfolding, and as we learn more, we'll get a better picture of what really went down and how it's all going to play out for New York and for the country.
So before we get into the last part of our deep dive, I want to ask you all out there, what stood out to you the most in all of this? What are you thinking about? What questions do you have? It's clear that this is so much bigger than just Adams or even New York City. It brings up all these questions about power, about the courts being independent, about us as citizens. Like, what's our responsibility to hold these people accountable?
Yeah, it's really interesting how the situation become a jumping off point for these bigger conversations about fundamental ideas. You see it everywhere, how people are talking about it, what the media is saying, even just in everyday conversations. It's a wake-up call. These things matter. They have real consequences for all of us.
No, for sure. For me, going through all this, there's one thing that keeps sticking with me, and that's those prosecutors. The ones who resigned. I mean, they could have just played it safe, protect their careers, gone along with the dismissal, but they didn't. They took a stand. They said, no, this isn't right. That's pretty powerful stuff. What do you think about that?
It's incredible. It shows that integrity, doing the right thing, it's not just some abstract idea. It takes real people who are willing to put themselves on the line, to make sacrifices, even when it's hard. Even when everyone's telling them to do the opposite.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of hope, in all of this mess. What does it tell us about where we are as a country, about our political system, and maybe even more important, what does it tell us about what we need to do as citizens? Do we just sit back and watch, or do we get involved? Do we demand better from these people in charge?
You hit the nail on the head. I think this underscores how important it is for us to be engaged, to participate in our democracy. We need to be informed, pay attention, and speak up. Hold our leaders accountable. Demand transparency, integrity. Remind them that they work for us.
Yeah, but it's become something much bigger. It's something we all need to think about. So thank you all for joining us on this wild ride. Keep asking those tough questions, stay engaged, and don't forget, your voice matters.